He programmed Pele Soccer, which was the first scrolling game for the 2600, which people said couldn't be done. He later went to Sega. He worked on the laser games there, which led to a career in computer animation for the movie industry, which leads into here today. So, welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Lenny. Thank you. Isn't he great, folks? He's here all week. Okay, so that's the nub of it, is I transitioned from the video game industry into the movie industry, doing visual effects for feature films. And that gives me a very unique perspective on video games. So I'm going to thread together the cross-pollination between video games and feature film visual effects. And at first, in the beginning of when we were just doing the 8-bit sprite thing, at first, the movies were being made into games, and I'm going to go through a short list of what those were. But now, video games are being made into movies. The video game properties are so valuable, they have such a large following, that they're making movies out of games. There's also a crossover in the talent and the technology between modern video games and feature film visual effects. Next. So my little thread in the fabric of Atari was between 1978 and 1983. I was there for 6 years. And I got there the first year of year-round production of the VCS. Prior to that, the manufacturing was a seasonal thing. They would fire up the lines just before Christmas, ship them off, and then shut it down again. But the VES, the whole video game thing, was starting to launch, so they were by the time I got there, that was their first year of continuous production. And I was in the home video game division, as Lenny mentioned, and I wrote Championship Soccer, and it was released as Championship Soccer, and then later, Pele. Everybody remember Pele?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So him being a hot property, Atari was into, marketing through hot properties. There's stories on that, I will tell you. And so they decided to rename it Pele's Soccer to capitalize on his name. I don't know if it helped sales or not. That was after I was gone. I also wrote the Stella Programmers Guide. A tale to tell here was I was in several departments of Atari, and then they put me into the video game division as a game programmer. I was not a programmer. Okay? And everybody there was a BSEE. So I was kind of, I had taught myself the programming language BASIC a year or two before, so I kind of grokked the concept of computer programming. I did not know 6502 assembler language. Okay. I had never worked with hardware registers. So I was on the defense trying to learn programming and learn the chip, and I found there was no documentation for the Stella Chip. So to help myself learn, I wrote it. I went around to the LSI engineers, and what's this register do, and all of that good stuff, and actually wrote the programmer's guide for the Stella Chip. And a terrific story on that is, I didn't know this, but about 6 months ago, a buddy of mine called and said, "Did you write the programmer's guide for Stella?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but how would you know that?" He wanted to write an Atari 2600 game, an insane concept, but he wanted to do that. So he went on the internet and searched 2600 Stella Programmer's Guide, and up it popped. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know it had been published on the internet. Well, the other interesting thing about that Pele's or Championship Soccer was everything had been a 2K cartridge up to that point. So this was the first 4K cartridge. Woohoo! So I had mountains of space. Okay. So because I had plenty of ROM space, I decided to throw in some extra goodies. One of the goodies I threw into this was when you made a goal, the screen switched to fireworks and a roaring crowd. Hooray! Okay, so there was a payoff. And then the Cartridge Manual was another interesting story. Up until that point, you guys remember the early video game cartridge manuals like Combat, or like a 3-page fold-out pamphlet thing? Well, for this one, I wanted to do a manual. So what I did was I wrote the first story, and I made up a team of loser soccer players, okay? And got the art department to draw some cartoon, kind of like Mad Magazine character. I'm still looking for a copy of this manual. I would love to find it on the floor today. So it actually had a story, it had characters, and then of course it had the gameplay and all that good stuff. The other thing that my little thread in the whole game thing was I actually added graphic artists and sound artists to the game development process. So I went to management and I said, I'd like to hire graphic artists to help with the graphics of our game. They said, what for? Because all the game designers were BSEEs. There wasn't an artist in the group. So we started bringing in artists, and a sound artist. I also wrote Snoopy and the Red Baron. And I got the actual guy, you know the Peanuts theme song for the Peanut Show on TV? I actually got him to write the music for that cartridge. The thing that was so impressive was I had to set him up with Stella Sound Chip computer information. He actually got it. He was able to make his music with the sound chip. Unbelievable. Also Easter eggs. Now here's a story. One day the management went ballistic. They found out that Warren Robinette had secreted his name inside the adventure game. And if you took the golden key and put it in the right place and swung a dead chicken around your head 3 times, his name would pop up. When management found out about that, they went ballistic. And I said, no, don't go ballistic. Planting Easter eggs in the game is great fun for the kids. So I convinced management to let them do it. And from that day forward, in fact, I went to all the programs and said, from now on, put an Easter egg in your game. And that's where the term came from, and that's why we now do that. Okay, next. So here's that Stella's Programmer's Guide. This is actually, there's 2 versions of it. This is actually a photocopy of my original text. Next slide. And I actually wrote timing diagrams like this to, you know, how many microseconds or milliseconds we had across the screen, how many scan lines, vertical interval, horizontal interval, and all that good stuff. There's a second version of this. If you will do a Google search on Stella Programmer's Guide, you'll find a second version. Some wonderful person completely retyped it. It's beautifully typeset. He also added a whole bunch of more timing diagrams than I had, and he still says, written by Steve Wright. So I got credit I don't deserve for that one. Okay, next. Now, here was the deal about the Atari VCS. The problem with it was the TIA chip, the Stella chip, was very, very weak. It was feeble. It had very little capability. This turned out to be also its greatest strength, because the game was in the software, and we could improve the software. Look at the difference between Combat in 1977 and Pitfall in 1982. Same chip. The difference is the quality of the software and the experience of the programmers. So because the hardware was so feeble, you had to be really clever in your software. In fact, this was one thing I took away from the video game development that has served me in good stead for my entire life. I learned the lesson of doing a lot with a little. And I use that in my feature film work and everything I do. It was a profound lesson, and there you can see the example of that. Okay? Go ahead, next. Now, at first, what happened was coin-op games were converted to home video games. This was the first, stepping out of just doing totally novel games on the Atari. And it made a lot of sense. We had very famous arcade games, so Atari would go around and purchase the rights to re-implement them on the Atari VCS, and there you can see the Defender screen. But Space Invaders, Missile Command, Asteroids, Pac-Man, Defender, many other, probably 20 or 30 arcade games. Well, this had a profound impact on the marketing department at Atari. They figured out that by having some well-known property, it increased the sales of the video game on the VCS. So they carried that to the next extreme. So they made movies. They started going out looking for movie properties to put into the video games. things. So taking that coin up to the next step. Well, I have an embarrassing story to tell. One day I got a call from Ray Kazar, and you guys remember Michael Moon?
Yes.
Okay.
The guy who told television that he taught Steve Jobs everything he knew.
Yeah. Mike Moon was not a great mind. Okay. He was a lovely fellow. At any rate, so I walked into a conference room with Ray and Mike Moon and several VP of marketing and all around a big table. At the other end of the table was a young gal with a carousel slide projector. She was pitching a new movie that they wanted Atari to purchase the rights to and make a game for it. So she was going on about an exciting new director, an exciting new talent, and an exciting new story about this bullwhip carrying guy that would go into the tombs and find treasures and things and stuff, right? I said, no, not a good idea. We shouldn't do that. Next. Okay. So, that did not work out so well. Well, he was an unknown. All right. Now, after the movie got out, and after it became a giant blockbuster hit, then Atari did purchase the rights, and in fact, Raiders of the Lost Ark video game was written by Howard Warshaw. Next. All right, so here are some of the early movies that were made into Atari games. E.T., of course. Raiders of the Lost Ark, of course. We just did that. But Tron and all three of the Star Wars of that time. Nowadays, ILM has their own game division. They write their own games and using their own properties. So the business has changed quite a bit. Crawl and many other games, and that is, of course, a play screen from Tron. Okay, next. Now, there is a crossover. There's been a crossover in the talent in between video games and feature films. When I first got into it, in fact, well, remember, in those days, you were doing 8-bit sprites, okay, and that was not even useful for any visual effects. Okay? The first thing that I did that might even be of minor interest to feature films, everybody remember Superman 3 with Richard Pryor?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Near the end of the movie, the bad guy with his computer game trying to shoot Superman out of the sky. Well, I produced that video game footage that they used in the movie.
You did that on the Atari 800, didn't you?
Oh, no. Now, there is a tale. Here's what happened. I was noticing that it was taking 9 to 12 months for a programmer to write a video game. And then we would go play test it and find out, So I said, we need to do something about that, because that is, it's a huge investment in money and time, and then you have a loser, you throw it out, you start over. What we need to do is separate the game design from the programming. I need a way to design a game, play test it, before we put it into programming. So I wrote a proposal to Ray Kazar that I wanted to get a big honking computer, and a big honking, what in those days would be called a frame buffer, and I wanted a software team, and we were going to design a game prototyping system that I could get a game up and running in 2 or 3 weeks. Then we could play test that and then go program the game. So we approved it. This was in the days of Dr. Alan Kay. They were very technology forward thinking. So I bought a symbolics Lisp machine. Well, first of all, I hired an aerospace engineer programming kind of guy. And he was really good. He wrote the system requirements document and the proposal documents. And we wanted a machine that we could write a game logic quickly and easily. And that's not C++ or Fortran or Pascal. We used a Lisp machine because it was an object-oriented machine, and you could write the logic of the game in just a couple dozen lines of code. So we could very rapidly prototype the game logic. Now, the Stella Chip, we bought an Iconis frame buffer, which was the size of a refrigerator. But it had memory. By the way, all of this is wildly superseded by your laptop today. All of that, okay. So the Iconis frame buffer was our graphics chip, if you will. So we actually put the Iconis frame buffer into the backplane of the Symbolics artificial intelligence machine, and they wrote the software, and we were able to get a game up in no time at all, and it worked. About the time that I had finished this prototyping machine, Superman 3 was in production, and it was done by Warner Studios, which was, of course, Time Warner, which owned Atari. So the head of Warner, the head of the Pinewood Studio, sent a letter to Time Warner. Is that who owned Atari back then?
Yeah,
Time Warner.
Warner Communications.
Warner Communications, thank you. Sent a letter to Warner Communications saying, we have a video game bit we want to do in our movie. Would you guys like to do that for us? So the CEO of Time Warner sent it to the CEO of Atari, Ray Kazar, who handed it to me. And I said, yes, I can do that, using my new rapid prototyping system. And we did. So we actually programmed all of that game stuff on that machine. I bought a film recorder, and we could shoot it out to film 1 frame at a time. In fact, I didn't know anything about film recorders back in those days. So I needed somebody to set it up. So I called a young stud named Carl Rosendahl, who is the founder of PDI. So he came over and he set up my film recorder, and we've been friends ever since. So that is the early gamers wanted to get into feature films, and that was a few years later, of course. Once the games had reached a level of power and sophistication, they were then interesting to the movie people. Now, the visual effects artists in the feature film business aspire to go to game companies, like Electronic Arts and Ubisoft and like that. So the tables have completely flipped over. Next. There's also a major crossover in technology between the video game industry and the movie industry. The whole polygonal modeling of a character with an inverse kinematic skeleton so that you can make the character walk and articulate, that is shared by both. Mocap. The gaming industry was a huge consumer of motion capture for their character walk cycles and all that. So they pushed the state of the art for mocap, and the feature film industry has benefited from that. Okay, now we use motion capture in feature films a lot. GPU programming. The modern video games, the GPU is a graphics processor unit. That's the geometry engines that push pixels at blinding speed. The CPU is the central processing unit, and that's where your program runs. And the GPU is something that can be typically 50 times faster than the CPU at doing stuff. So the GPU is responsible for drawing triangles, flood fill, update the texture maps, and drawing the picture on the screen. The CPU does the game logic, that the character move from here to there. The GPU then paints that picture for you. Other things like particle systems, I don't know if you're familiar with particle systems, but if we need dust or snow or rain, you really don't want to be modeling all those guys in polygons and then keyframe animating them. So particle systems generate millions and millions of little bits, and you can use the programming languages. I want you to blow this way, I want you to fall down. So you can create these kind of particle things. And then stereo 3D games. It was actually, stereo 3D, as you know, is now very, very big. So in the early days, there was actually a stereo 3D game, Road Racer, that was actually in stereo. So, okay, next. Here's an example of a major video game company moving into the movie business. Ubisoft is a huge video gaming company, and they opened up a movie division. The reason I know that is after 20 years in the chair in the movie industry, I have switched in 2005 to teaching and training. I've written a couple of books, and I travel around the world to visual effects studios, like this one. And I teach the staff visual effects compositing and Nuke, which is a big game programming, visual effects compositing system. So Ubisoft brought me in to teach their staff how to do visual effects for feature films. And they have 25 studios in 7 countries. The Montreal office, which is where I went, has 2,100 employees. And Ubisoft does 1.4 billion in revenue. That's just that one company. So they're a power hitter in the world of video games, and they are opening up their own movie division to do their own game properties into feature films. Okay, next. All right, so today, there are no more sprite-based. I don't think there's a sprite-based game. Maybe the Wii. But now true 3D games are what are on the market, and the game machines like the Xbox have massive number of GPUs and geometry engines in them, and these are huge production efforts. They can have a budget of $100 million to write one of these games. They'll have a team of 60 to 80 artists, and just like in the feature film business, the artists are now specialized. In the feature film business, we got guys that do water. We got guys that do snow. We got hair guys. All they do is hair, because that's a specialty. So they've broken up, subdivided their teams into specialists to produce these games, and they'll spend 2 or 3 years in their production, and they can get a successful winner hit game can make them $1 billion. These numbers are rather similar to feature film production. Okay, next. Now, I'm a member of the Visual Effects Society, and I'm on the judging committee for judging awards for visual effects. And this year, for the first time, there was a video game category. This is the category here, Outstanding Visual Effects in an Animated Commercial or Video Game Trailer. It took the VES several years of hemming and hawing and head scratching to figure out. They recognized that the quality of visual effects in the games was getting better, better, and better. And it started to approach what was going on in the movie industry. So they felt the need to recognize them. But they're still a little schizophrenic. So they're recognizing the major contribution that games are making to the technology and the art of visual effects. But right now, that was the only entry point. Was the only award, but they're thinking about how they can expand on that and have video games have more awards at the Visual Effects Society. Next. Now, these are some of the video games that have been made into movies. Okay, Super Mario Brothers. I love that movie. That's so cute. That's just really a cute movie. Mortal Kombat, of course, a Tomb Raider, and Resident Evil, and Prince of... I did not know that Prince of Persia, I love Prince of Persia, I did not know that came from a video game. But sure enough, it did. Okay, next. Now, here are some future planned games to be made into movies. Halo by Microsoft, there's a picture of it over there on the right. Call of Duty by Activision, Resident Evil number 5, Dead Space. You know, it used to be that Harry Potter had the #1 box office revenue. He made something like $250 million in the first weekend. But then Dead Space came out and made $300 million in a few days of its first release. It was just an absolute jaw-hanger. Blew out the top movie making. Video games today exceed the music industry and the movie industry and the DVDs, okay? All the home sales and DVDs. When I was at Atari, video games, because that was their first, the video games have done like 3 of those things. So I was there on the first one. And we made $6 billion a year, and that was greater than the movie industry and the record industry combined. Okay, next. Now, believe it or not, there are actually plans to turn these 2 8-bit classics into movies. Missile Command, of course, written by Rob Fulop. Now, of course, that was first a coin-op game, and I'm sorry, I do not know the coin-op.
Dave Thurer.
Ah, thank you. I'm limited to the home video game. And of course, Asteroids, which was a non-trivial programming job on the Atari. Now that's from the arcade game, I believe, that screen. But the point is, here's the bafflement to me. These 2 games have neither stories nor characters or plots. Okay, so how are they going to turn these into a movie? I'll be fascinated to see.
Battleship.
Oh, that's right. Battleship was also a game. Okay, so but you know, Hollywood has unlimited talent for telling a good story, so I'm sure they'll do a nice job of these. Just by the way, to counterpoint that it's not impossible to do something like this, think of Pirates of the Caribbean. Okay, it's a dark ride. I've been on it many, many times. And it just has a theme, you know, pirates. but they did a wonderful job of turning that into a very successful, not only a movie, but a franchise. All right, then. Thank you. Any questions? No? Good. Bye. Oh. Hi.
Just a comment. Also, Max Payne was made into a movie.
Okay. Max Payne was made into a movie, he says.
Hitman and Wing Commander.
Hitman and Wing Commander were made into movies. Well, that, I covered that with the many more comment. Dot, dot, dot.
Coming up will be probably Angry Birds. Besides movies, it's made millions of dollars and other.
Well, Angry Birds, of course, is the pinnacle of your interactive phone game. Are you telling me they're going to make Angry Birds into a movie?
Yeah, they already.
Oh, dear Lord. Sometimes I am ashamed for my industry.
Another downfall coming?
Huh?
Another downfall coming?
Downfall?
Yeah, with the Angry Birds thing, yeah.
No, it's astounding, being in the movie industry, seeing them take a brilliant, well-developed property like Star Trek. Okay? Anybody here ever see the first Star Trek movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
I stood in line for hours, and I sat in there, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. And I watched that movie and said, who are these people? What are they doing in this? It's like the guys that wrote this movie never heard of the show, did not understand the characters or the storyline or anything. Now Star Trek 2 was great. Wrath of Khan. Okay? But nevertheless, they managed to pick up a fully mature franchise and blow it. I don't even know how you do that. So hopefully they'll do a nice job on our Missile Command and our Asteroids game. Any other questions or comments?
You had said that Ubisoft is making a production company.
The movie division, yes.
I was just assuming that's probably for Assassin's Creed. So they make their own Assassin's Creed.
My guess is, I don't know their marketing plans. Ubisoft didn't reveal that to me, but my guess is that they're setting up the department to do a series of properties, not just one. That could be the first one, because Assassin's Creed is big, 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 big. Huge, huge product. But they wouldn't set it up just to do that one movie. Their plan was to turn their product lines into movies, so that might be the first one. Okay, any other questions or comments or observations? All right then, thank you very much.